Hi, this is Steve Rigolosi, and tonight on Forgotten Mysteries, I have for you The Glow by Brooks Stanwood. And this is copyright 1979 by McGraw-Hill. Not a house that we really think of in terms of fiction publishing these days, but back in the day, they did have a fiction list and published some pretty good stuff. So, initial disclaimer is that even though this channel is called Forgotten Mysteries, I don't think it would be fair to put The Glow into the category of mystery. It's really more suspense, thriller with horror and supernatural and science fiction. It kind of goes to those places. So before you pick it up, be aware that that's what it is. I would call it a novel sort of creeping horror or creeping menace. It's not, blood and gore and ectoplasm. I wrote a book like that called The Haunting of Kennoway House, but this is not it. So Brooks Stanwood, interestingly, is the pseudonym, or was the pseudonym, for a husband and wife team of Howard and Susan Kaminsky. And Howard was a pretty big deal in the publishing industry, ended up running several imprints, several houses, was quite a big shot. And Susan was also a writer with her ties to the publishing industry. And that leads to an aspect of this book that I did enjoy, which is that the lead male, Pete Lawrence, is an editor for a publishing house. And so, I'm sort of an editorial geek. I like reading about editors. And, I kind of have a feeling that a lot of readers do, even if they're not, editors themselves. I think a lot of readers are sort of interested in what goes on in the publishing industry. And oh boy, that could be a whole separate channel, right? Because it's nuts. It's just a nutty industry. Large chunks of it are based on completely irrational thought, business practices that are decades out of date. I mean, it's just wacky. Don't get me wrong. I love it, but it's wacky. But it's been very good to me at the times when it hasn't treated me like crap. So, it's a one big sine wave, right? So, here's the basic story. A young couple who are, living in cramped quarters in Manhattan. I mean, can you be of the middle class and live in anything but cramped quarters in Manhattan? They've just decided they've had it with their tiny dark apartment and they're looking for something better. And get this, their budget for rent per month is $800. Okay. I don't even think $800 a month in Manhattan now would get you a broom closet. In fact, I get ads in my sidebar all the time advertising New York real estate to me. One bedroom, $5,200 a month. Studio, $4,500 a month. I'm like, for an apartment that you rent and don't own anything, that's the way I think. But, Manhattan real estate is just insane. And so is Brooklyn. And I'm pretty sure that's true of San Francisco too. I don't know so much about Chicago and Philadelphia, but certainly New York and San Francisco, the price of living there. I'll just tell you a little anecdote on the side. I worked with an author who I loved, who was based out of California and taught at a college in San Francisco. And she told me that some of her students turn tricks. In other words, prostitute themselves so that they can make enough money to live in San Francisco. Okay, I mean, we're not here to shame sex workers or anything, but could you personally imagine being willing to be a sex worker just so that you could afford to live in a particular city? I don't know. Not me, but I'm sure others out there, it's possible. Pete and Jackie Lawrence, they are looking for a better apartment. Pete who's, he's kind of a doughy guy. He's fallen out of shape, and he decides to get back into shape and starts running, and in the parks of New York and around the Central Park Reservoir and all that other stuff. And he meets sort of an elderly couple who are nice to him when he gets mugged, and it just so happens they have a fabulous apartment for rent at a really low price. So he and his wife, who also wants to get into shape, move into that apartment. And of course, immediately we sense that things are wrong. The residents of this East Side apartment building, like sort of a mid-rise, they're fanatically devoted to exercise. When they're not running, they're swimming in their rooftop pool. When they're not swimming, they're working out on the Nautilus. They watch and count every single calorie that goes into their body. They guilt you if you eat anything that isn't 100% natural. Certainly sugar is, someone just gave me a thumbs up. Okay, that was nice. They guilt you if you have a cocktail or two, or you eat pasta because it's all carbs, and they just seem to know way too much about you. And things become increasingly creepy as other young couples in this apartment building start to disappear unexpectedly, with no real explanation. Pete and Jackie have become friendly with them, so they're surprised when they disappear. And they start to realize that these people, their landlords, the other residents of the building, the fanatical joggers, are, they look like they're in their 50s, but a lot of them are really in their 80s or closer to 90, and they just look so amazingly fit, except when they don't. They seem to go through these periods where they look much worse than they usually do. You could probably figure out what's going on. I won't tell you, because that is the suspense of reading this book. And I will say it's a fun read. It's fast. You, even though you kind of know what's going on, you can kind of see it coming because it's telegraphed. You're still turning the pages and enjoying the story and wondering what's going to happen to Pete and Jackie. Will they make it out alive or will they not? To read the book, you'll have to find out. So my overall, view of this book is that it's good escapist fiction if you like this kind of thing. Don't expect intimate character portrayals. The characters are all very, very flat. The dialogue is very one note. The characters, the older characters in the building, are sort of one note characters. You can't even really tell them apart. But if you can put up with all of that, it is a fun read. Let me tell you what for me, kind of just took it down a couple notches in my estimation. The first being that this plot is lifted play by play from Rosemary's Baby. I mean, it's actually kind of, in a way, shocking that if you look at the framework on which Rosemary's Baby is built, and you overlaid that on the framework on which this book is built, they're practically the same. I mean, you could tell that Brooke Stanwood was very highly influenced by Rosemary's Baby. And that caused me to go back and think, now, am I being unfair? Did this book come after Rosemary's Baby? And of course it did, by more than 10 years. And so, they, clearly they were emulating a best-selling book, and hoping to have success with that formula. And they did. I mean, this book was on the bestseller list for a while. And I believe it might have even been made into a movie. But, I mean, I guess I shouldn't be shocked by this, given that, the publishing industry tried to basically clone Gillian Flynn's Gone Girl for 10 years after its publication. I mean, it's so beyond ridiculous. I don't even have the words, right? I mean, I think there are a lot of readers out there who, after a couple of years of reading Gone Girl knockoffs, they said, enough is already. But the publishers say, we agree with you. They said, no, we're going to keep signing clones of Gone Girl. We're going to keep looking for variations on that theme. We're going to look for another book that can sell 10 gazillion books, just as Gone Girl did. As if that's possible, right? As if a book cloned from another book is going to be the success that the original book is. I mean, it's just moronic thinking. And that's what I mean about the publishing industry. There's not a lot of rational thought sometimes. Except, I would say, for the publishers who work for me. I'm in no way criticizing you, because I love all of my clients. They're wonderful. But, let's say fiction publishing is just much more loosey-goosey, shall we say, than nonfiction, which is most of what I work in. Another thing about this book, and this can go either way, depending on the way you read or what your personal sensitivities are. On the plus side, you really feel Manhattan in this book. You feel the life of Manhattan, the way Manhattanites live with their love of going out to eat to restaurants and going to plays and doing all those cultural things that New York has to offer. And also sort of encapsulating some of the diversity that is in New York City, which is, I think, a positive thing about this book, except that there's a rather stereotypical portrait of a flaming gay black man that's a little off-putting because of its stereotypicality. So it's kind of a love letter to New York City, but at the same time, it makes you understand why some people despise New Yorkers or Manhattanites, because it's page after page of name dropping of fancy hotels and fancy restaurants and fancy retailers and fancy boutiques. I mean, it's never, like, these authors would never say, Jackie put on her bracelet before leaving the apartment. They would always say, Jackie put on her Tiffany bracelet before she left the apartment. Or they wouldn't say, Jackie was meeting her friend at a local department store for a shopping spree. She would say, Jackie was meeting so-and-so at Bloomingdale's, or, some other upscale retailer. So it feels a little, like I said, name-droppy, and almost as if it's out to sort of impress you with those brand names, which, I know some people out there are. I know a lot of people who are not. So if that kind of thing gets on your nerves, I think you will see that in this book, and you will think kind of, get off your high horse, Brooks. The life is about more than overpriced brand names. And that's really my review of this book. I will say that I read many years ago the follow-up to this book called The Seventh Child, and it had pretty much the same strengths and same weaknesses as The Glow, except that one I felt was more of a, I shouldn't say ripoff, let's say homage to Thomas Tryon's Harvest Home, which is one of my favorite horror books. It is just wonderful and amazing. I mean, Thomas Tryan's early books were spectacular. And I will admit my own haunted house book was inspired by Thomas Tryan's Harvest Home. And then later in their career, it looks like these authors gave up the pseudonym of Brooke Stanwood and decided to write under their own names. And so I looked up some of those books. One is called Talent. I think it's about a talent agency. And it didn't really, the description didn't make me think, oh, I've got to put this on my list and keep my eyes peeled for it when I'm in a used bookstore. I think 2 Brooke Stanwood's books are enough for me. So bottom line, good fun, not to be taken seriously, a good beach read, a good airplane read. I will say, oh, this is one thing I should mention, that probably my favorite aspect of it, and I don't know if this was intentional or not, is would you call it a parody of people who are fanatically devoted to running? I don't know, because the characters in this book are fanatical runners. I mean, this is what they do with their lives. And there's even a blurb on the back from Jim Fixx, who was that big running guru back in I think the 70s and 80s. And Brooke Stanwood really conveys the, I guess, almost addictive aspect to running, that nothing stops runners from running, not earthquakes, not the apocalypse, nothing. And I'll admit that I live in a neighborhood where there are joggers. And where I live, it's been at least 95 degrees every day for the last 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, it's hot as F-U-C-K. And I see people outside running. And I'm thinking, what the hell is going through your head? What makes you think that running in 95-degree weather and 98% humidity is a good idea? But they're so fanatically devoted to it that they're out there doing it. And so, given my own, mixed feelings, on the one hand, I think you need a checkup from the neck up. And on the other hand, I think, wow, I really give you props for being so devoted to exercise and to your physical well-being that you are willing to run out for hours in what is the equivalent of a swamp. People do it, so God bless them. It's almost like, how guys who have those cut abs, those washboard abs, you can really admire them for their self-discipline while thinking, my God, is it worth it? Is everything that you've had to give up in your life worth having those washboard abs? But clearly the answer for them, it is. For me, not having washboard abs, it is not. So that's what I've got for you tonight. The Glow by Brooke Stanwood. Give it a try if you're looking for something fun and maybe a little bit different from what you normally read. Really easy to find used copies of it for a really reasonable price. And if you do read it, of course, I'll be interested to hear what you have to say below. Okay, thank you and good night.